Hi there, my name is Virginia Hicks, and I'm currently finishing my Bachelor's of Science in Energy and Sustainability Policy through Pennsylvania State's World Campus. And for the past 3 months, I've had the pleasure of studying and researching a topic of my choosing. And today I'm very excited to share with you my project on Citizens Climate Lobby's proposed carbon fee and dividend policy. And I hope you enjoy the presentation. Citizens Climate Lobby is a nonprofit, nonpartisan, grassroots advocacy organization focused on national policies to address climate change. Citizens Climate Change has proposed the passage of their carbon fee and dividend proposal. According to Citizens Climate Lobby, also known as CCL, their proposed carbon fee and dividend proposal is, and I quote, a national revenue-neutral carbon fee and dividend system which would place a predictable, steadily rising price on carbon, with all fees collected minus administrative costs returned to the households as monthly energy dividend, end quote. CCL entered the public arena in 2007, and just over the past couple of years has started to see progress made. In 2016, the Climate Solutions Caucus was started by 2 South Florida state representatives, Congressman Carlos Curbelo and Congressman Ted Dutch. On Curbelo's House website, he established the mission of the Climate Solutions Caucus, which is, and I quote, to educate members on economically viable options, to reduce climate risk, and to explore bipartisan policy options that address the impacts, causes, and challenges of climate change, end quote. In addition, the co-chairs, Curbelo and Dutch, decided that membership will consist of equal representation of Republicans and Democrats. And as of September 2017, the Climate Solutions Caucus has reached 58 members, 29 Democrats and 29 Republicans, and is still growing. This growth since 2016 is commendable, especially as it is equal growth of Democrats and Republicans. Our current political climate is divided, and the fact that the Climate Solutions Caucus is gaining bipartisan support shows how strongly the public and members of Congress feel about the threat of climate change. Now I'd like to just take a step backwards and take a look at the courses in which I've studied over my time through Penn State's World Campus that have helped me to lay the groundwork for this capstone project. The first course is Energy Policy. This has played a major role in laying the foundation for this class. I took this class with Professor Robinson in the spring of 2017. Energy Policy provided me with an in-depth exploration of energy policy development, implementation, and assessment at multiple governmental corporate scales. Professor Robinson did a fantastic job of bringing current events and policies into the classroom to enrich our learning experience and our understanding of energy policy as a whole. Energy Policy class utilized current real-world problems and actions to provide us as students with the context for drivers and frameworks and assumptions of energy policy. Indeed, I'll be using this foundation late in this class to move forward with my study of CCL and carbon fee and dividend policy. Another class that played a major role in laying the foundation for this capstone project is Orientation to Energy and Sustainability Policy. While this was an orientation class, I mention it as being a contributing factor to this semester because this course laid the foundation for my studies as an ESP student. I took this course with Professor Sankey back in spring of 2015. This was my first taste of the ESP program, and it laid the foundation for the courses ahead, including this one. I found this class most helpful because it prepared me for my coursework here at PSU. The first half of the semester we focused on communication skills. This was imperative as it helped me fine-tune my communication skills so I could move forward as an ESP student. While I first transferred into this program, there was a few gaps where I wasn't in school. Professor Sankey did a great job of working with me to improve upon my skills and help me in the right direction as far as my goals as an ESP student are concerned. A third class that played a major role in my ESP foundation is the class from Meteorology to Mitigation, Understanding Global Warming. I took this class in the spring of 2016 with Professor Michael Mann. At this time, I was unaware of how famous Professor Mann is. In fact, during the past few weeks researching CCL, Professor Mann's name has come up in several articles, and even Congressman Curbelo speaks of his work. I feel it was a privilege to be in Professor Mann's class. The coursework was hard as we worked with climate simulation models. However, by the end of the course, I had a more solid understanding of climate change, its projected impacts, approaches to mitigation. I learned that neither adaptation or mitigation of climate change is enough, but rather collectively we need both measures to confront climate change. CCL's carbon fee and dividend is exactly that, a proposed climate solution. The fourth and final class I'd like to mention is Energy in a Changing World. I had the pleasure of taking this course in the summer of 2016 with Professor Cole. This course wowed me in the sense that it pulled my previous classes together, and it was a turning point in my studies where I felt like things were finally coming together. In Energy in a Changing World, we looked at existing energy infrastructure and energy that fuels us both nationally and internally. I learned that we aren't as dependent on imported energy as I thought we were prior to becoming an ESP student. In addition, we learned about evolving techniques, implementation, and challenges in meeting energy demands in a carbon-constrained world. This course really prepared me for my capstone project because Energy in a Changing World bridged the gap between my science understanding and my policy knowledge. In this class, I learned how the two are connected and how imperative it is to tie together the science with the policy. It seems that CCL is doing just that, bridging the science with the policy. Next, I'd like to discuss the ESP program and how they emphasize 5 competency areas that have been addressed through my studies. The first one is energy industry knowledge. Part of my study of energy industry knowledge was being able to explain the principles of energy and environmental economics, including pricing of non-market values, cap and trade, and social discounting. In addition, under this competency, we learned to recognize and correct misinformation about the energy resources we depend upon. My study of CCL for my capstone will demonstrate strong working knowledge of energy industry knowledge because one of CCL's driving forces in educating the public on the correct information in regards to climate change. Another way my study of CCL will demonstrate strong working knowledge of energy industry knowledge is by examining the pros and cons of cap and trade versus CCL's proposed carbon fee and dividend. We learned a great deal about the positives and negatives of cap and trade, and throughout this capstone project I will be looking at that and comparing it to CCL's carbon fee and dividend proposed plan. The second competency area is sustainability ethic. A core concept we learned under the competency area of sustainability ethic is the importance to advocate public participation in decisions whose outcomes affect environmental justice. CCL is focused on the core concept of sustainability ethic. CCL was founded in 2007 by volunteers who encouraged others to engage in public participation to put into effect a climate policy solution. In this case, carbon fee and dividend policy. In addition, the study of CCL will further emphasize the importance of my study of ethics. Climate change is affecting and will be affecting every individual on the planet. CCL feels, as do I, that they have an ethical responsibility to propose a climate solution and to do everything possible to get this policy implemented. The third competency area is global perspective. In my ESP studies, we also examine global perspectives. This is a very important competency area to consider because climate change is a global problem. We need to act globally to solve this. While many of us have access to electricity, clean water, and food here in the United States, some do not, especially in developing countries. While CCL is focused on getting carbon fee and dividend policy to pass in the United States, their efforts also reach out globally. By examining CCL's global action, in addition to the action taken in the United States, it will demonstrate my strong working knowledge of global perspective. The fourth competency area is analytic skills. The ESP program greatly broadened my analytical skills in regards to being able to find, read, interpret, and synthesize evolving energy policies and regulations. It also helped me to be able to prepare and critique quantitative benefit and cost analysis of proposed and existing energy ventures. Examining CCL for my capstone will demonstrate my strong understanding of analytical skills because I'll be working in depth at CCL's carbon fee and dividend policy and how that affects the economy, specifically in regards to it being revenue neutral proposed policy. In addition, by exploring CCL's history, I'll be able to demonstrate my understanding of how energy policies evolve over time to meet the current needs of the policy. The fifth competency area is communication skills. Through my studies as an ESP major, my communication skills have greatly improved. I've learned how to effectively explain climate change and solutions to a diverse audience, and also have learned to actively listen from other members of diverse teams. Examining CCL for my capstone will demonstrate my strong understanding of communication skills because I will be using them when I give my public speech about CCL and energy policy to a group of 8th graders. This will allow me to demonstrate that I am able to cater my speech to a particular audience. In addition, I will be using my communication skills for the capstone project, for the written report, and where my writing skills will be evident. Now back to Citizens Climate Lobby and a little bit of background about them. According to the page about Citizens Climate Lobby, CCL is a nonprofit, not partisan, grassroots advocacy organization focused on national policies to address climate change. Their mission statement is, and I quote, "We exist to create the political will for climate solutions by enabling individual breakthroughs in the exercise of personal and political power." End quote. CCL is based out of Coronado, California. However, their work expands across the United States and in some other countries. As mentioned, CCL is committed to building the political will for climate solutions that are needed. CCL is a lobby consisting of concerned citizens, like myself, who feel empowered to talk with others about climate issues, whether neighbor, friends, or coworkers. These volunteers range from high school students to grandparents, to oil engineers in Texas to farmers from Virginia. According to CCL's page, What We Do, they state, and I quote, "CCL volunteers are organized into hundreds of local chapters across the U.S. and the world. These chapters build political support for climate action with a variety of tools which they use in keeping with their local culture and politics. By focusing on shared values rather than partisan divides, we build relationships with community leaders and with federal elected officials and with Congress, always starting from the place of respect, gratitude, and appreciation." The closest CCL chapter to me is in Miami. However, it's still in the growing stages of being established. And while it's been in the process of being established, one of the lead of the chapter is Greg Hamera, who I had the pleasure of speaking with via email and actually met with him in person at a local CCL meeting. It was talking with Mr. Hamara that I began to fully understand CCL's proposed carbon fee and dividend policy. Greg then directed me to join the weekly CCL introductory call that they do online every week. From Mr. Hamara in the introductory call, I learned that CCL is mostly made up of volunteer citizens like Mr. Hamara or myself. CCL volunteers are broken up into chapters, with a leader of each chapter whom represents their local area, and each chapter is part of a region of CCL. Each region has a regional coordinator that communicates with each region. In Miami's case, the regional coordinator is Jay Butera. Aside from a few paid positions, CCL is comprised of volunteers. In addition, many times volunteers will initiate their own group. For example, less than a year ago, the Broward chapter hadn't been established yet. However, a local CCL member expressed an interest during an introductory call, and the regional coordinator helped this member to start the Broward chapter, which is still expanding and becoming established. Further, CCL is coordinated through regular email communication in combination with chapter meetings and monthly internationally teleconferences each month. In addition, CCL regularly engages in social media, volunteer work, writing to local government representatives, and other different levels of communication. The focal point of the year for CCL is their annual international conference in June, which includes meeting with and lobbying with as many members of Congress as possible in Washington, D.C. In fact, since I expressed interest in CCL, I had received a personal email from Mark Reynolds inviting me to the annual conference for this year. However, due to scheduling, I was unable to attend. The legislative agenda for CCL is to have carbon fee and dividend policy pass in Congress. However, before getting into that, here is some further information on the founder and president of CCL, Marshall Saunders. Marshall Saunders is the founder and president of CCL. In July of 2017, Saunders went live on a call to all CCL members where he went over CCL's history. Before starting his talk, Saunders quoted Alex Steffen, who said, and I quote, "Optimism is a political act. Those who benefit from the status quo are perfectly happy with a large population of people who believe that things can neither get any better. In fact, these days, cynicism in obedience, and what's really radical is being willing to look directly at the magnitude and difficulty of problems that we face and still insist that we solve these problems," end quote. Saunders piggybacked off this quote to express his gratitude and how proud he is that so many members are so optimistic and that they bring this optimism into the political arena. Saunders stated, and I quote, "And I love your willingness to be cynical, and I love your willingness to look right at the magnitude and difficulty of the problem. We still insist that we can solve these problems," end quote. Saunders went on to discuss history of CCL. One day he was speaking at a retirement home at the Rancho Bernardo, where 13 people came down to listen to him. Apparently, 2 elderly women came up to Saunders after his talk and pressured him into starting a group workshop, with the first one being at Rancho Bernardo. This workshop became the Citizens Climate Lobby. 29 people showed up to the first workshop, and by the end of the third-hour workshop, all attendees wanted to become more involved. This led to the initial division of CCL in the North Country, Central San Diego, and South Bay region. Saunders admits that despite all the interest, he wasn't quite sure how to bring about the change and what type of legislation he needed to push for. Saunders stated that the early stages they lobbied for several different things, such as a stable climate, fee and tariffs, and then for the state's right to regulate tailpipe emissions and several others. Indeed, the beginning of CCL was a bit of a touch and go while they were trying to determine how they could have the biggest impact on legislation. Now, moving to 2008, the group is still struggling to determine what they are lobbying for. So Saunders reaches out to Tom Stokes, a 40-year-old veteran of the climate movement. Tom Stokes mentions to Saunders that he recently reached out to Congress about a carbon fee and dividend policy, which Saunders had not heard of at the time. Saunders felt the idea of carbon fee and dividend was the best idea they've come across, and soon enough they made that their goal. Tom invited Saunders to come to Washington for a congressional briefing. Saunders got on the next plane. Saunders was very impressed by the carbon fee and dividend policy, and that was the beginning of Citizens Climate Lobby starting to take off. As far as the status, we'll fast forward to January 3rd of 2009, where Tom Stokes was a guest speaker on the monthly CCL call. This was the first time CCL used the words carbon fee and dividend. And Saunders relates that, or the first time ever I felt like we were lobbying on a solution that was a match for the problem. This brings us to the legislative agenda for CCL. The legislative agenda for CCL is to have the carbon fee and dividend policy pass in Congress. CCL's The Basic of Carbon and Fee and Dividend does a great job of explaining what carbon fee and dividend is and how it works. According to the basics of carbon fee and dividend policy, the first step is to place a steadily rising fee on carbon. CCL states there, to account for the cost of burning fossil fuels, we propose an initial fee of $15 a ton on the CO2 equivalent emissions of fossil fuels, escalating $10 a ton per year, imposing upstream at the mine, well, or port of entry, accounting for the true cost of fossil fuel emissions, not only creates a level playing field for all sources of energy, but also informs consumers of the true cost comparison of various fuels while making purchase decisions. Second piece is to give 100% of the fees, minus administrative costs, back to households each month. On this part of their plan, CCL states, and I quote, 100% of the net fees from the carbon fee are held in a carbon fees trust fund and returned directly to the households as a monthly dividend. About 2/3 of households will break even or receive more than they would pay in higher prices. This feature will inject billions into the economy, protect family budgets, free households to make independent choices about their energy usage, spur innovation, and build aggregate demand for low-carbon products at the consumer level. This step is imperative to CCL's success because it makes carbon fee and dividend a revenue-neutral solution, while also allowing each household to make improvements to reduce their own carbon footprint. Third step, or the third aspect of carbon fee and dividend, is that CCL will use a broader adjustment to stop business relocation. CCL states on this matter, and I quote, import fees on products imported from countries without a carbon fee, along with rebates to U.S. industries exporting to these countries, will discourage business from relocating where they can emit more CO2 and motivate other countries to adopt similar carbon pricing policies. Building upon existing tax and trade systems will allow complex new institutional agreements. Firms seeking to escape higher-level energy costs will be discouraged from relocating to non-compliant nations, as their products will be subject to import fees, end quote. Finally, CCL's website emphasizes that carbon fee and dividend is good for the economy and even better for the people. CCL included a study from EME, which shows that carbon fee and dividend will reduce CO2 emissions 52% below the 1990 levels in 20 years, and that recycling the revenue creates an economic stimulus that adds 2.8 million jobs to the economy. A structured rising price on greenhouse gas emissions will focus business planning on optimizing investment priorities to strive in a carbon-constrained world. Additionally, carbon fee and dividend is projected to prevent over 230,000 premature deaths over 20 years from improved air quality, end quote. While this is all great in theory, how will this be brought about on a legislative level? Well, this brings us to the Climate Solutions Caucus. According to the Climate Solutions Caucus webpage from CCL's site, and I quote, "The Climate Solutions Caucus is a bipartisan group in the House of Representatives. The goal of this group is to explore policy options that address the impacts, causes, and challenges of our changing climate." End quote. According to the documents filed with the Committee on House Administration, the caucus will serve as an organization to educate members on economically viable options to reduce climate risk and protect our nation's economy, security, infrastructure, agriculture, water supply, and public safety. The caucus is fairly new as it formed in February 2016 by Representative Carlos Curbelo and Representative Ted Dutch. Both Curbelo and Dutch serve as co-chairs on this caucus. Despite forming in 2016, the caucus has grown tremendously and in a short amount of time. As of October 2017, the caucus has 60 members, 30 Democrats, and 30 Republicans. Next, I'd like to move on to stakeholders who are in support of carbon fee and dividend. They would be ExxonMobil, BP, Royal Dutch Shell, and Total SA. ExxonMobil, BP, Royal Dutch Shell, and Total SA are stakeholders for CCL's carbon fee and dividend policy. On June 20th, 2017, the New York Times released an article stating that ExxonMobil and 3 other gas companies lend their support to the carbon tax proposal. The article Tuesday stated that they have a number of reasons to lend support. Schwartz later says, and I quote, "The oil giants could simply pass the cost of new taxes on to customers, and to protect American companies, the plan would introduce so-called broader adjustments intended to increase the costs of goods coming from nations that do not have similar carbon tax." End quote. This article was groundbreaking because while companies like ExxonMobil said in the past that they would support climate solutions, this is the first time they came outright and said they would support this policy. Now moving on to stakeholders who are against carbon fee and dividend. The first one is Koch Enterprises. According to a New York Times article, Koch Industries, a conglomerate that has played a major role in pushing Republicans away from action on climate change, is ramping up an already aggressive campaign against climate policy, specifically against any tax or carbon price. Owned by the billionaire brothers Charles and David Koch, the company includes oil refineries and the paper goods company Georgia Pacific. Indeed, Koch Enterprises is against carbon fee and dividend. The next stakeholder against carbon fee and dividend is the Cause Against the U.S. Carbon Tax, also known as CATO, or CATO. CATO's name alone, Cause Against the U.S. Carbon Tax, makes it ever clear that they are against carbon fee and dividend. According to CATO's website, they feel, and I quote, "the actual economics of climate change, as summarized in the peer-reviewed literature, as well as United Nations and Obama administration reports, reveal that the cause for a U.S. carbon tax is weaker than the carbon tax proponents claim." End of quote. In addition, they state, and I quote, "future economic damages from carbon dioxide emissions can only be estimated in conjunction with forecasts of climate change. But recent history shows those forecasts are in flux, with an increasing number of forecasts of less warming appearing in the scientific literature in the last 4 years. Additionally, we show some rather stark evidence that the family of models used by the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is experiencing a profound failure that greatly reduces their forecast utility." End quote. Indeed, Cato is absolutely against carbon fee and dividend policy. Third stakeholder against carbon fee and dividend policy is Chevron. In April of 2017, Chevron Corp CEO John Watson signaled his opposition to taxing greenhouse gas emissions making him an outlier among oil executives. Fourth stakeholder against carbon fee and dividend would be President Trump. Americans for Tax Reform released an article stating that President Trump is against the carbon tax. In fact, President Trump tweeted, and I quote, "Your story about me and the carbon tax is absolutely incorrect. It's just the opposite. I will not support or endorse a carbon tax," end quote. As far as related literature and existing approaches, CCL is not the first group to try to put climate solution policies into action. In addition to the proposed carbon fee and dividend policy, many have proposed cap and trade. Like carbon fee and dividend, cap and trade is a proposed solution to decrease greenhouse gases and mitigate climate change. However, it works a little differently than carbon fee and dividend. How it works is a cap is established on emissions. According to the EDF, the cap on greenhouse gas emissions is a limit backed by science. Companies pay penalties if they exceed the cap, which gets stricter over time. And the trade part is a market for companies to buy and sell allowances that permit them to emit only a certain amount. Trading gives companies a strong incentive to save money by cutting emissions. In other words, the government sets up a cap on emissions for certain industry. If industries plan to reduce their emissions below their cap, they are allowed to trade, usually for profit, their caps to other businesses or industries. The whole idea is to cap or set a definite limit to the amount of carbon entering the atmosphere. Another proposed approach is a carbon tax, which, while similar to carbon fee and dividend, is different. A proposed carbon tax is typically envisioned as a carbon tax, which would be imposed on fossil fuel suppliers at a rate that reflects the amount of carbon that will be emitted when the fuel is burned. The tax would be included in the price of the coal, oil, and natural gas supplied to wholesale users and ultimately passed on to consumers in the price of electricity, gasoline, and other energy-intense products. Many economists do not like the idea of a straight carbon tax because it's not revenue neutral. And that's how carbon fee and dividend is different. Carbon fee and dividend, while imposes a fee, it also gives a dividend, or money back to each household, thereby creating a revenue neutral approach. Both cap and trade and carbon tax are both steps to addressing the climate solution. However, carbon fee and dividend is structured differently to be more appealing to all. Moving on to the analysts of Citizens Climate Lobby's carbon fee and dividend. Their policy is a proposed climate change solution that I personally fully support. Since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, carbon emissions have been on the rise and have contributed to global climate change. Activities since the Industrial Revolution have only increased, without steps taken to offset the carbon that is being emitted. For many years, our country, as well as the world, have flourished from the use of fossil fuels to build cities, infrastructures, water and wastewater plants, as well as provide energy for daily living. While the economic growth has been great for the global economy, the carbon emitted from the growth is having a negative effect on the Earth. Today, it is understood that climate change poses a catastrophic health concerns combined with the threat of sea level rise, increases in flooding and droughts, and increases in severe weather patterns and increases in health illness. In most places, there aren't policies to place limits on the amount of carbon that is put into the atmosphere. If we continue with business as usual, the increasing threat of global climate change becomes a threat for all mankind. There have been some proposed solutions to address this and create a climate solution. However, I feel the best proposed policy is carbon fee and dividend policy proposed by Citizens Climate Lobby. I briefly went over early on some reasons why carbon fee and dividend is the right proposed climate solution. However, I'd like to go over some of them a little bit more in depth in this regard. And I will be discussing the 6 reasons carbon fee and dividend is the right proposed climate solution. The first one being that carbon fee and dividend works by placing a steadily rising fee on fossil fuels. And here we are able to see the example of how CCL explains that to account for the cost of the burning of fossil fuels, CCL proposes an initial fee of $15 a ton on the carbon dioxide equivalent emissions of fossil fuels, increasing $10 a ton each year. This is imposed upstream at the mine as well as the port of entry. According to the true cost of fossil fuels emissions, not only creates a level playing field for all sources of energy, but also informs consumers of the true cost comparison of various fuels when making purchase decisions. Secondly, CCL proposes, through carbon fee and dividend, to give 100% of the fees, minus the administration costs, back to the households. I found this imperative because just creating a carbon fee doesn't address the use of fossil fuels. However, by turning money back to individual households, they're able to take steps to reduce their carbon footprint, whether that's buying a hybrid or electric car, installing solar panels, or enabling households to buy their foods locally. There are countless ways that giving back this dividend to households will create ways to decrease carbon emissions. Also, I feel that giving the dividend back to the households is a great option as it makes the proposed carbon fee and dividend revenue neutral. Many other climate solutions are not revenue neutral, so it concerns economists. However, the fact that carbon fee and dividend is revenue neutral puts economists at ease while looking out for the best interests of the citizens. Thirdly, carbon fee and dividend allows for broader adjustment to stop business relocation. The general fear with imposing a carbon fee or tax is that it will drive business out of the United States to other countries where companies can escape this fee. However, carbon fee and dividend allows for a broader adjustment to prevent this and keep as much U.S.-based businesses in the United States. For example, import fees on products imported from countries without a carbon fee, along with rebates to the United States industries exporting to those countries, will discourage businesses from relocating where they can emit more carbon dioxide and motivate other countries to adopt similar carbon pricing policies. Building upon existing tax and trade systems will avoid complex new institutional arrangements. Firms seeking to escape higher energy costs will be discouraged from relocating to non-compliant nations, and their project will be subject to import fees. Fourthly, and most importantly, carbon fee and dividend is good for the economy and even better for citizens across the country. I discussed before how CCL included a study from EME, which shows that carbon fee and dividend will reduce CO2 emissions 52% below 1990 levels in 20 years, and that fee and dividend will and recycling the revenue creates an economic stimulus that adds 2.8 million jobs to the economy. A structured rising price on greenhouse gas emissions will focus business planning on optimizing investment priorities to thrive in a carbon-constrained world. Addition, carbon fee and dividend is projected to prevent over 230,000 premature deaths over 20 years from improved air quality. During these times, many are worried about the economy and jobs and fear that proposed climate change solutions will decrease jobs and negatively affect the economy. However, CCL has specifically structured their proposed carbon fee and dividend to instead create jobs while decreasing carbon emissions. Fifthly, carbon fee and dividend does not increase the size of government, require new bureaucracies, or directly increase governmental revenues. The dividend increases real disposable income, protects personal spending decisions, and will recruit widespread sustained engagement. Finally, carbon fee and dividend is elegant in its simplicity, transparent in its accessibility to public scrutiny, and clear in its signals and benefits engagement. In addition to everything listed above, CCL has also conducted a household impact study. In February of 2016, Citizens Climate Lobby and Citizens Climate Lobby Education released a working paper on the financial impact on households of carbon fee and dividend. The working paper assessed that the net financial impact on the United States of $15 a ton of carbon dioxide, in which all fees gathered minus administrative costs would be returned to each household on a per capita basis. CCL includes some highlights of this working paper on their website. Household impact study highlights include, and I quote, 53% of U.S. households and 58% of individuals receive a net financial benefit as the dividend exceeds the estimated increase in cost of goods purchased. This analysis includes none of the health and environmental benefits that come with the reduction of greenhouse gases. I found this to be a huge selling point for me, that over 50% of individuals would be receiving a net financial benefit, which doesn't include the health benefit that comes from reduced carbon emissions. In addition to the household impact study, I would also like to go into more depth about the REMI report. In 2013, CCE commissioned Regional Economic Models, Inc., or REMI, to study the effect of a revenue-neutral carbon price on the American economy. Chosen for its track record in providing analysts to both governmental bodies, and the fossil fuel corporations, REMI's analysts concluded that such a system would have a strong positive economic effects on the nation's health and prosperity alike. What is most remarkable is that the REMI analysts concluded that during the first 20 years alone, a carbon fee and dividend policy would lead to the following three things. Firstly, a 50% reduction of carbon emissions below 1990 levels. Secondly, the addition of 2.8 million jobs above baseline, driven by the steady economic stimulus of the energy dividend. Thirdly, the avoidance of 230,000 premature deaths due to the reduction in air pollutants that often accompany carbon emissions. So the REMI analyst reveals a 50% reduction in carbon emissions, which is essential to be, especially as it's below the 1990 levels. As far as the recommendation section of the report, Citizens Climate Lobby proposed carbon fee and dividend. Basically, it's a great climate change solution. However, any proposed policy needs stakeholder support to make progress. With climate change becoming more and more of a concern, not only to citizens, but also to corporations and members of the government, some stakeholders are taking a side on carbon fee and dividend. As far as the basis for recommendations, one supporting stakeholder is ExxonMobil. While they are an oil and gas company, and many initially perceived that they would not support a climate solution, such as carbon fee and dividend, ExxonMobil has actually taken a strong stance for supporting climate solutions, such as carbon fee and dividend. On their page, Engaging on Climate Change, ExxonMobil discusses the basis for which they support such climate solutions. ExxonMobil discusses on their page, and I quote, "To fully grasp the magnitude of the challenges before us, it is critical to recognize the importance of energy to society, as well as understand the fundamental drivers of energy demand. Indeed, when discussing any climate solution, whether carbon fee and dividend, or any other solution, it's imperative to look at why these solutions are needed. ExxonMobil does a great job of breaking down the importance of such changes." And that's where ExxonMobil states, "Energy powers economies and enables progress throughout the world. It provides heat for homes and businesses, power for hospitals and clinics, fuel for cooking and transportation, and light for schools and streets. Energy also opens up trade and transportation, improves healthcare and sanitation, and expands education and individual opportunities. Expanding access to reliable and affordable energy will improve the lives of billions of people around the world, including more than 1 billion who currently lack access to electricity, a staple of modern life many in the developed world take for granted. It's also important to recognize the demand for energy is projected to continue to grow as the world's population increases and more people join the ranks of the middle class. ExxonMobil acknowledges the growing need for energy and states, "The world will meet this growing need for energy with a wide array of energy sources and technologies, including wind, solar, and other renewables, as well as nuclear power and hydrocarbons such as oil and natural gas." Indeed, while we are seeing the effects of climate change, the world is still in need of energy sources. And this need is only going to grow as the population continues to grow and more people enter the middle class. This is why ExxonMobil supports climate solutions. To further touch upon ExxonMobil supporting climate solutions and carbon fee and dividend, the ExxonMobil site actually goes on to state the following, that a careful analysis of global needs and aspirations make it clear to the world that we'll need hydrocarbons to lift billions out of poverty. That is why it will be essential to find ways to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions associated with energy use. At ExxonMobil, we are committed to engaging in dialogue about climate change at all levels of society, with governments, NGOs, academia, and the public. We are also dedicated to working to reduce the risk of climate change in the most efficient way for society, while recognizing the importance of abundance and affordable energy and supporting economic growth. Our commitment to positive action on climate change can be broken down into 4 components: engagement on climate change policy and planning, mitigating greenhouse gas emissions in our operations, development of products that help customers and consumers reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and investing in the next generation clean technologies. In addition, ExxonMobil outlines what they believe effective policies to be, which are listed here: to promote global participation, to let market prices drive the selection of solutions, to ensure a uniform and predictable cost of greenhouse gas emissions across the economy, to minimize complexity and administrative costs, to maximize transparency, and provide flexibility for future adjustments to react to developments in climate science and the economic impacts of policies. Indeed, ExxonMobil feels the goal of climate policies should be to reduce the risk of serious impact to humanity at minimal societal cost. That is exactly what Citizens Climate Lobby proposed carbon fee and dividend policy will do. By placing a fee on carbon, it will reduce carbon consumption, and in addition, by giving the dividends back to the households are able to make changes to reduce their carbon use. ExxonMobil supports this because they support a revenue-neutral carbon tax, as stated above, and that's exactly what the carbon fee and dividend is. In conclusion, Citizens Climate Lobby is a nonprofit, nonpartisan, grassroots advocacy organization focused on national policies to address climate change. Citizens Climate Lobby has proposed the passage of their carbon fee and dividend proposal. According to Citizens Climate Lobby, their proposed carbon fee and dividend proposal is a national, revenue-neutral carbon fee and dividend system which would place a predictable, steadily rising price on carbon, with all fees collected minus administrative costs returned to households as monthly energy dividend. Climate change is real and is occurring. Climate change is posing threats by increasing sea level, surface temperatures, increasing in storms, increases in precipitation, increases in droughts, and many more. Citizens Climate Lobby has proposed a climate solution of carbon